Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast on YouTube. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. Over in Las Vegas is Matthew Pennie, as you can see by his beautiful curtains. Over on YouTube, until the NBA draft, we're going to be diving deep into 2022 NBA draft prospects, giving scouting reports regarding their offensive projection, defensive projection, their overall projection in the NBA, and then maybe some team fits that might make some sense. And today we're focusing on AJ Griffin. That's how you ended up at this link. So as usual, I will give Matt Pennie the floor. He will explain all you need to know about AJ Griffin.
So by the numbers, he did not measure the combine, which makes our job a little bit more difficult. What do we want to say? 6'6", 200 pounds, 220 pounds. I think that's what Duke listed him at this year. Averaged 10.4 points per game, 3.9 rebounds, shot 49% from the field, 45% from three, 79% from the free throw line. Only one double-digit scoring game in his first six or so, and he did turn it on late in the year once he got his legs underneath him a little bit more. He had 27-4 at North Carolina. He had 20 points against Syracuse. He had 21 versus Miami in the conference tournament. He is a synergy shooting darling. He was in the 98th percentile in points per possession. He was the 97th percentile in all jump shots, 95th percentile in catch and shoot, and 91% in spot-up shooting.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought up the shooting because I think that's where it has to start. I think he is the number 2 guy in this class in terms of long-term potential as a shooter behind Jabari Smith. I just think Jabari Smith is going to be able to get to his shot a little bit easier and thus is going to be able to just shoot over the top because he's 6'10" in a way that AJ might not be able to. That's going to give him a little bit more upside as a shooter. But in terms of just natural touch, there is certainly a case that AJ Griffin has more of it than anyone else in the class. I mean, this is a guy that just consistently knocks down shots. He has this very weird wide base that I'm sure that you want to talk about that it doesn't look like it should work in the way that it does as a shooter. He has stranger mechanics than what you think, but his natural touch just kind of takes over in such a real way that it's hard to think he's going to be anything other than a very high level to potentially elite shooter at the NBA level by the time he's 20 to 20 or 23 to 25 years old.
Shooting is a major skill, and he's best when his feet are set, albeit extremely wide, which doesn't make a ton of sense. And on the move, it's kind of difficult for him to turn and shoot with such a wide base. He finds a way. He finishes high, too, with a lot of arc on that shot. He can take 1 to 2 dribbles to break down his man and pull up. It's usually like a hesitation or a hang dribble before he gets to his move because he's an angles driver, and he doesn't blow by guys with that first step. He does have some craft to pump fake or lean in, little tricks of the trade that could be based on his dad's NBA background as a player and coach. So he learned and taught with him there. And he is also a very good scorer of cuts when the shot isn't falling or as a counter when his defender's really hugged up to him away from the ball. I like the way he reads screens well to curl or to fade kind of based on what the defense gives him. And the other aspect of his game, he can get some buckets in transition. And that was one of his better stat-filling areas in high school. With the loss of some of that vertical pop, which could be due to injury and time, he isn't quite the same converter that he was. But you see the videos, you see the pictures, he's leaning his body back out. Maybe with a full offseason to heal, he could return some of that form. And he shows you a few moves per game that take you to the way back machine of when he was at Archbishop Stepanak, when he was this really fluid scorer that gets to his spots and not necessarily just this shooter that we've kind of put him in this box as too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's worth noting too, like you brought up like the 1 or 2 dribble pull-up game, right? Like I actually think that he has very real upside as a pull-up shooter. You look at his step back game, like it's pretty sick. Like he has a 6'10", 6'11" wingspan at 6'6". He has a very high release point. He just kind of gets a lot of separation using those long legs into that wide base onto those step back jumpers, which allows him to be effective on them. It's actually like pretty hard to guard his like left to right dribble between the legs, like into the step back going left, because you really have to stay balanced on him. His moves, they flow into one another. like in a way that just makes sense, right? Like, and he also has this really impressive little like turnaround jumper to his right, and then he'll like get to the rim using that power from his lower half. Like he's really good at leveraging defenders, I think. It's just it's hard if you guard him small, he's going to rise up and get to you. I think you're better off guarding big against him right now because he's going to knock down shots. It's just whether or not the athleticism is going to return in a way that allows him to be effective as a pull-up shooter and as a guy that can put pressure on the basket, because right now it's just kind of hard for him, I think, to really truly pressure the rim in a real way.
Now let's shift. Let's talk defense. I think we're rather flowery and glowing on offense. Let's talk some defense.
Well, hold on real quick. Before we talk about the defense, I do want to talk, like, what do we think his upside is offensively? Like, I feel like it is genuinely a 20-point scorer if he brings back some of the athleticism.
Well, that's the upside, and giving him some of the benefit of the doubt because he has battled injuries for 2 years. He missed a season of games, like a lot of players in this class, of on-court development due to COVID. He turns 19 in August. He's still young, so I don't want to write him off either. But yeah, the upside is a 20-point per game scorer, but there's still a lot of pieces that have to take to get to that point.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, now the defense, and I know you want to talk about the defense.
Oh, yeah, let's talk defense. We're both sides of the ball here. So the feet are heavy. They are, and especially on slides. And then when he's off the ball, he has a bad tendency of losing his man on screens, both on the ball and away from the ball. He doesn't get a low enough center of gravity in his stance and can be easily like screened and then just die right there on the vine a little bit. And doesn't
Which is funny for a guy who uses such a wide base as a shooter,
right?
Everywhere else, on defense.
And here he's not. Doesn't react well enough out of help position either to not be caught up in that back screen. Some of it's just positioning. Like he has the feet, but the positioning isn't great too. Slowish on scrambles to recover when the play gets scattered. I like the size that he has in theory to switch up the lineup a little bit, although he doesn't do it all the time. But he has to be careful on his end. He has some tendencies and traits to be a guy that could be hunted on the floor unless he improves how he plays positionally within different coverages.
So I do actually like him better guarding up the lineup. I think he's much more effective doing that right now. Having said that, I thought his defensive tape among guys in my current top 30, so not including Pat Baldwin, not including a couple others, I thought his tape defensively would project him toward being an effective defender eventually if he's willing to take the time to learn, to become a more aware defender, and to get back a lot of the flexibility that we're talking about here with AJ Griffin athletically. I think that's ultimately the biggest thing. He's so heavy-footed on the perimeter. I thought he got blown by in switch scenarios by lead guards. He tries to use that length to recover, but the problem is that he's so square and doesn't have that hip flexibility. He just can't really turn and recover. Like he just ends up kind of like sliding back and then getting caught like in his slide, and he can't actually go and get back into the play. That also hurts him in ball screen scenarios. Like he gets clipped on screens all the time. Yeah. And then because he's so heavy footed, he struggles to get back in the play whenever he gets clipped on a screen. So I guess that like, I don't really know what you do with him on defense because you can't really play him, on the ball in a drop setting because he is going to get clipped by screens and then he's not really going to get into the play. So you can't really have him fight back over the top. I don't think you can really play him in a switch scenario right now against smaller NBA guards because they're just going to burn him. Yeah. So I do worry that he's going to get hunted. Like the AJ Griffin we saw at Duke would get hunted. Right. The key here is trying to project future improvement. And then on top of it, like, there are guys that get hunted that make an impact in other ways. I thought he was horrible on closeouts this year. Has that heavy footed, closeout angle where, if he goes like, right at someone and they just drive right by him, he can't get back in the play because his feet just kind of get stuck in the mud. Duke seemed to have a lot of communication issues, and like maybe this wasn't totally him, but like they had a lot of communication issues when he was involved in the exchange, I thought. There's very little about his defensive game. You mentioned the ball watching. I thought he missed tags on pick and rolls. there's a lot there that I'm very, very worried about. But the key here is just all upside. And AJ Griffin is the hardest player, I think, to truly evaluate in this class because we don't have the full picture in terms of what he can be athletically at some point. He just has missed so much time, including time in the preseason this year due to, if I remember correctly, knee surgery, right?
Yeah, sounds right.
Which could have placed him behind the 8 ball to start the season defensively in a real way. On top of it, maybe just didn't have that kind of quickness that we're hoping for. Ultimately, I'm glad that he seems to be thinning down through the pre-draft process. I'm a little bit lower on AJ, but I will say that I think that AJ is almost purely a philosophy play where you either should have him 5th because he is the guy outside of the top 4 that has a chance to be the best shot creator in this class and the best shot maker in this class. And if you truly believe that he can regain some of that flexibility, he's going to be probably a 20-point scorer. I'm just more skeptical of that. And I think that you should either have him 5 or you should have him outside of your top 10 because you're either buying into him regaining athleticism or you're not. And if you're not, he's like kind of a better version of Aaron Naismith almost, right? Like, which is scary for teams drafting in the lottery. I would still take him in the lottery, but he's more of a, guy that I have in the 12 to 14, 11 to 14 range.
I'm in the same bucket. I have him 13th. And for fit, for the moment, I view him as the floor is kind of a flattened shooter to the corners out of pick and roll. And you hope that he hits it because if those shots aren't falling, it's like, what exactly is his contribution when he's out there? In terms of just range for the draft, I think you nailed it. It probably starts even a little bit lower, like maybe Portland at 7, could go all the way down to like maybe 20 with San Antonio, who's got a couple picks, but it's wide. It's like the stance. It's just very wide. The tape was a little confusing for me. There's injury concerns. Which version of AJ Griffin are you really drafting?
Yeah, and this comes back to, information we don't have on AJ. You've mentioned the injury concerns a couple of times. I mentioned the knee surgery that I believe he had in the preseason, or the knee injury, maybe is a better way to put it. He has had a history of ankle injuries in high school. Teams hopefully will have access to his medicals, and we don't know what those look like. But with a guy that has had injuries in the past, I think you do have to widen out the draft range a little bit more than you typically would for a guy like this, because you just never know, right? Like we don't know what is going to come back there. Could be totally clean and he goes in the top 10. Could have some concerns, right? I would say 7 to 20 is about right. And I think that people, the reason that I go into depth explaining why I think 20 is a reasonable low point is because I think people will think we're crazy that he could go like outside of the lottery.
A little crazy, but if people follow along, they know we have some wild takes, but they're not that outrageous. But that's sort of how draft night can shake out sometimes too.
Yeah, and look, the teams that make sense. Portland is a team that does tend to draft on upside. I think that makes a lot of sense. New Orleans is a team that really needs floor spacers next to guys like Herb Jones and Zion Williamson and Jonas Valanciunas, right? Could make some sense at number 8. Just kind of looking down the order. The Knicks could use a shooting wing for sure. Oklahoma City is accumulating talent, and they could certainly use more floor spacing around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Josh Giddey. Look, at the end of the day, I do think he's going to go somewhere, in that 7 to 14 range, but we shall see. If he gets down to Cleveland, like Cleveland really could use another shooter with a big body on the wing. They also have the defensive infrastructure to maybe make up for some of his concerns. So that's all I've got. Penny, do you have anything else on AJ Griffin?
No, it's great. Great cover. 14 would make a lot of sense for Cleveland.
Okay. This has been the Game Theory Podcast on YouTube. That's our take on AJ Griffin. We'll be back later this week with more of the scouting reports. Please follow along, subscribe, do everything you can to support the channel.